Juan Zarate, CBS News senior national security analyst, joins us on the phone. Juan, let me just start off by asking you what you make of this attack. What is it that intelligence officials are learning about ISIS based on these attacks?
Well, Elaine, I think they're learning that ISIS has better capabilities than they had thought to be able to execute attacks in the heart of Europe, far afield from their central caliphate and operational areas in the Middle East, Iraq and Syria in particular, and even Libya. And so the fact that this follows on the major attack in Paris in November, which was the first ISIS-generated and directed attack in Europe, and now you have a second in fairly quick succession, even while European authorities were trying to disrupt it as aggressively as they could, does suggest a level of operational sophistication and certainly strategic capability to hit in the heart of Europe that has European officials and intelligence officials around the world very concerned.
Are European countries, Juan, you think, doing enough to fight extremists who are living right in their communities?
Well, I think there are two dimensions to the problem, Elaine. First is, are they doing enough to discover and counter those that are dedicated to the use of terrorism and violence against fellow citizens or against European populations? That has to do with intelligence gathering. That has to do with information sharing. That needs to be improved. There's no question about that, both within countries like Belgium and within the European Union and between key partners and countries. That is improving. That's getting better, but it's imperfect, and it's not good enough at this point. The second part is, are they doing enough to deal with the deep pockets of radicalization that have persisted in many ways in neighborhoods like Molenbeek, in parts of the UK, parts of France outside of Paris? Are they doing enough to counter the extremism, the radicalization? Some of that is undercutting the ideology. Some of it has to do with integration. Some of it has to do with socioeconomic factors. But all of that has to be part of the game plan here for European officials if they are to deal with the problem of radicalization in their midst.
Juan, you and I talked on Friday when Salah Abdeslam was captured, and I wonder what you make of the timing of these attacks. It's just 4 days after that, and as we discussed, it was almost by happenstance, essentially, from what we understand, because it was a week ago that authorities in Belgium found an apartment that they were looking at, found some DNA and fingerprints of Abdeslam in this apartment, and then a couple days later there on Friday went to that area there in Molenbeek and carried out an operation and took Abdeslam into custody. But as we understood it, it was almost a lucky break in the sense that they weren't expecting to find anyone in that original raid. They were thinking it was going to be an empty house, an empty residence. Instead, there was a person there who was killed. They found that person with an ISIS flag and a Salafist book. What do you make now, the fact that just 4 days after Abdeslam was captured, you have these attacks taking place?
Well, I think in the first instance, the strong perception and suggestion is that these may have been accelerated attacks in the wake of the arrest, and certainly the media accounts that Abdeslam was cooperating and providing information about other operatives and attacks. And so that may have been the moment at which his co-conspirators decided to move forward with the terrorist attacks that we witnessed today. And so I think his arrest may have been a prompt to accelerate what had already been long planned and what was being prepared as a potential attack. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. The second has to do with your very interesting observation, which is, you know, the Belgian authorities and other European authorities seem to be stumbling into discovery of terrorist networks. And I think that is really a key issue here, because authorities are blind in some way to the threats that are in their midst, to the networks that have emerged, and certainly some of the individuals who present a risk. And so they are, grasping at threads of intelligence and information and following those, and those are leading to additional pieces of information and discovery. that's good intelligence and law enforcement work, but it certainly isn't comforting when we know and assume that there are others out there potentially plotting attacks in Europe.
And in fact, Juan, we're showing our viewers now this image that was taken from the CCTV footage at the airport here of a suspect, a third suspect on the right, who is the subject now of this massive manhunt. And Belgian authorities are asking the public for their help. What does that say about the authorities' efforts there and the fact that they're turning to the public for help on this?
Well, this is an all-hands-on-deck approach by the Belgian authorities and certainly European authorities. They realize they have a very serious terrorist operator who was a part of this plot in some way, who is now on the loose. And the presumption is that he has the capability to perpetrate other attacks. He may provide links to other elements of the network. And it may be that he, like Abdel Salam, provides yet another link and a thread to another element of this network that is potentially a grave threat to Belgium and to France and to others in Europe. And so I think that the manhunt is obviously has to be full-throated and aggressive. And at this point, that involves enlisting the public to ensure that this is an individual who doesn't get away and certainly isn't comfortable enough to begin plotting and planning yet another follow-on attack. But they've got to worry that this is an individual who knows he's been spotted, knows he's a wanted man, and could decide to perpetrate another attack in fairly short order.
Juan, how is the threat environment in Europe the same or different than the threat environment here in the United States?
Well, Lane, there are broad similarities in that there are terrorist organizations committed to a violent ideology that have the United States and Europe squarely as central targets, as the far enemy, and are doing everything possible to try to at least inspire individuals to attack, if not to actually implant and deploy operatives, as we've seen in Paris and Brussels. And so that's sort of a common thread here, that both the U.S. and Europe face a common enemy that is intent and capable of trying to attack in the West. The difference, though, and it's an important set of differences, is that Europe has a higher volume of terrorist operatives that have gone to fight in Iraq and Syria, many of whom have come back. The number estimated around 5,000. In the U.S., that number is probably between 200 and 300. You have deep pockets of long-standing radicalization in neighborhoods and communities that have drawn not only radical ideologues, but also adherents, and have created an environment where this kind of ideology can take hold more readily and more quickly. That has been less so the case in the United States, much less so. And finally, in the United States, post 9/11, we've been much more aggressive about breaking down walls, information barriers, creating an information sharing environment where law enforcement and intelligence feel free to share with each other. There are less barriers to sharing both within the federal government and between the federal government and state and local authorities. In Europe, there are still great divisions in terms of what can be done with information, the bureaucracies that are at play, even within a country like Belgium, where some of the authorities don't even talk to each other at times, and certainly legal barriers. For example, the inability to raid a terrorist safe house after a certain hour or before a certain hour. All of those things are restrictions that hobble Europe and European attempts to disrupt terrorist attacks, but have not been an issue for the U.S.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if anything changes in those European countries as a result of these latest attacks. All right, Juan Zarate, thanks so much for your insight.
Thank you, Elaine.